Welcome to downtown Buffalo. As usual, this video is designed as an aid to exploration. Log off the computer, pull up this video on your phone, and go for a walk. Each time I'm done talking about a building, I'll throw up a map to get you to the next one. Pause the video and take a stroll. Indeed, feel free to wander off script for a while. I'll still be there when you get to the next site, and there's always another side street to explore. While there had been a settlement on the site of present-day Buffalo for many years prior to 1825, it was the opening of the Erie Canal in that year which emphatically set aside the city as the location of a potential metropolis. The culmination of decades of work by Governor George Clinton of New York, the canal connected Lake Erie with the Hudson River, instantly establishing itself as the principal route for immigration and trade with the Great Lakes. Buffalo's location at the western end of the canal ensured that the city would rapidly grow into the gateway to the American West. Between the opening of the Erie Canal and the beginning of the 20th century, Buffalo grew explosively, nearly doubling its population every decade and quickly becoming the largest city on the Great Lakes. The city's extensive harbors broke new industrial ground with the construction of the world's first grain elevators in the 1840s, and with the arrival of the first railway in Buffalo in 1843, the city quickly developed into a major railway hub, a fact which merely reinforced the city's importance as a port. Buffalo's explosive growth in the 19th century established the city as a financial and distribution hub for the Great Lakes, but the growth of such new centers as Cleveland, Detroit, and Chicago, all of which grew to surpass Buffalo around the turn of the century, left the city's economic hinterland dramatically reduced. Nevertheless, downtown Buffalo retains one of the absolute best collections of historic commercial architecture on the continent. Over the years, the city played host to the work of major architects from both the East Coast, Richard Upjohn and George Post, for instance, and Chicago, Daniel Burnham and Louis Sullivan, for instance, most of the best of which survive to the present day. Today's walk begins in Niagara Square. Niagara Square stands at the center of Buffalo's network of radiating streets. The square, along with the streets radiating outward from it, were laid out in 1804 by Joseph Ellicott, a land surveyor who later established himself as one of the leading politicians in western New York. The obelisk in the center of the square is a monument to President William McKinley, who was assassinated in Buffalo in 1901 while speaking at the opening of the Pan American Exhibition. The monument was dedicated 5 years later, erected to plans by Kerr and Hastings, one of the leading architectural firms of the day. Indeed, several of the period's greatest architectural minds had been involved. Daniel Burnham, arguably the most prominent architect of the period, had consulted on the project and selected the monument's location, while the lions at the base of the obelisk were carved by Philmaster Proctor. The structure dominating the west side of Niagara Square is Buffalo's City Hall, one of the best Art Deco structures on the continent, and the tallest structure in the city when built. In 1920, Buffalo's city government was housed in an imposing Gothic structure, which had been opened in 1875 and was shared from the beginning with the county government. Since that date, however, the population of the city had more than quadrupled, and the small size of the county and city hall was beginning to hamper the government's functioning. Anticipating similar growth in the future, the city elected to erect a new structure, although it wasn't until 1929 the construction actually began, with the new city hall finally opening its doors in 1931. The new building was designed by John Wade of Dittle, Wade & Jones, and remains one of the most expensive municipal buildings ever erected, the final price tag totaling approximately $95 million in today's money. The facade of the City Hall is festooned with impressive stone carving. If you're taking this tour during business hours, step into the building to view the spectacular murals in the building's lobby. If you're taking this tour outside business hours, make a note to return to see the murals, which were created by William de Leftworth Dodge and are among Buffalo's greatest artistic treasures. While inside, take an elevator to the 13th floor to visit the richly ornamented council chambers. The views from the public viewing platform on the 28th floor are also impressive, although a practical note should be made that a narrow and winding staircase needs to be navigated in order to reach the viewing platform. Moving clockwise from the City Hall, the next building around Niagara Square, filling the block between Niagara Street and Delaware Avenue, is the Robert M. Jackson Courthouse. An outstanding work of postmodern architecture, the building was erected to plans by the New York architectural firm of Cohn Penderson Fox and opened in 2011. Across Delaware Avenue is the Statler Hotel, built in 1923 to plans by George B. Post. Ellsworth Statler had opened a temporary hotel in Buffalo for the Pan American Exhibition, and went on to open a number of large hotels across the Midwest. His first Buffalo hotel, now demolished, was famous as the first hotel ever to have a private bathroom attached to each hotel room. By the 1920s, Statler felt that his earlier Buffalo hotel was inadequate, and erected a massive new structure, a hotel which was not merely the largest in the city at the time, but with 1,100 rooms actually larger than all other hotels then in the city combined. Continuing clockwise around Niagara Square, the block between Genesee and Court was once home to Buffalo's first high school, and is today the site of the William Mahoney Office Building, built in 1928, and home to Buffalo's principal courthouse until 2011. The building was designed by Edward Green & Son, one of Buffalo's most prominent architectural firms, and features some excellent ornamental stone carving and metalwork. Further around the square, between Niagara and Delaware Streets, is the Buffalo Athletic Club, erected in 1929, also to plans by Edward Green & Son. Leave Niagara Square, heading southeast on Niagara Street. The building on the southwest corner of Niagara and Franklin was built as the first Unitarian church in 1833, and is the oldest surviving building in downtown Buffalo, although the structure as you see it today owes its appearance to extensive renovations in 1880, in which the building was converted to office use and nearly doubled in size. Turn right onto Franklin Street, and walk south to the intersection of Franklin and Eagle Streets. The massive Victorian structure on the southwest corner of Franklin and Eagle is the predecessor structure to Buffalo's City Hall, erected between 1871 and 1876 to plans by Rochester architect Andrew Warner. The building served as the city's political heart at the time, as it was actually a combined home for the City Hall, county offices, and county courthouse. It was here that future President Grover Cleveland served his first important political office when he was elected mayor of Buffalo in 1882. It was here that William McKinley lay in state after his assassination in 1901, and it was here that McKinley's assassin was tried and sentenced. The structure, so spacious in 1876, had become woefully inadequate by the 1920s, when it was pressed into the service of a city 4 times the size of that which it had been built for. When the City Hall moved out, however, the county government acquired the entire building, rebuilding many of the interior spaces in 1925. The structure remains home to Erie County's offices to the present day. Continue south on Franklin Street. The impressive terracotta office building on the southeast corner of Church and Franklin was built in 1914 as the regional offices of the New York Telephone Company, an impressive monument to an industry which had not even existed a generation earlier. Stop in front of St. Joseph's Cathedral. Roman Catholics had been among Buffalo's earliest settlers, but the community grew slowly, and by the time the Diocese of Buffalo was established in 1847, there were still only 16 Catholic parishes in all of western New York. John Tillman, the new bishop, felt that this needed to be corrected, and anticipated the need to care for the spiritual needs of the tens of thousands of Irish, Italian, and Central European immigrants who would flood into Buffalo in the middle of the 19th century. Among his many projects, one of the largest was the construction of a proper cathedral for the diocese, work on which began in 1851. The new church was designed by Patrick Keeley, an Irish Catholic architect from Brooklyn, with close ties to the Catholic Church. Designed on a French model, the structure was originally intended to have 2 spires, but when the building was opened for worship in 1855, the towers had not yet been completed. The south tower was added to the church in 1862, but the north one remains incomplete to the present day. The cathedral is usually open for prayer through the week, and is well worth stepping into. The oldest stained glass windows in the church were a gift to the diocese from the King of Bavaria. Continue south on Franklin Street to Swan Street, and turn left, walking a block east on Swan Street to Pearl Street. The 10-story Dunn Building, on the southwest corner of Swan and Pearl, was Buffalo's first skyscraper, built in 1894 to plans by the local architectural firm of Green & Wicks. Turn left again, walking a block north on Pearl Street to the intersection of Pearl and Church Streets. The picturesque church on the southeast corner of Church and Pearl Streets is St. Paul's Cathedral, Buffalo's Episcopal Cathedral. St. Paul's is the oldest surviving parish in Buffalo, having erected its first structure in 1821. The present structure was built for the congregation in 1850 to plans by Richard Upjohn. Richard Upjohn was a prominent New York architect who was in large part responsible for professionalizing architecture in North America. He was a founding member and the first president of the American Institute of Architects, and is credited with introducing the Gothic Revival, previously an almost exclusively English movement, to the United States. Best known as the architect of Trinity Wall Street in New York, Upjohn actually considered St. Paul's to be his finest work. The building is a wildly asymmetrical structure, taking on a new personality from every conceivable angle, yet possessed of a solid dignity nonetheless. The church was nearly destroyed in a disastrous 1888 fire, which left only the tower and the exterior walls standing. The present interior, designed by Robert Gibson, another New York architect deeply steeped in Gothic traditions, is well worth stepping inside if the church is open. Across the street from St. Paul's Cathedral, on the southwest corner of Church and Pearl, is another nationally important building, the Guaranty Building, designed by the Chicago architectural firm of Adler and Sullivan in 1895. Louis Sullivan, one of the firm's partners, is widely regarded as one of the most important figures in the build-up to modern architecture. He wrote extensively, arguing that a building's form should follow directly from its function, and that traditional forms of ornamentation ought to be disposed of for the modern era. He was a personal mentor to Frank Lloyd Wright, and his work was widely regarded by the leading architects of the 1950s and 60s. Sullivan's own work, however, was by no means as unornamented as the work of his admirers. The Guaranty Building, widely regarded as one of his masterpieces, is indeed mostly devoid of ornamental themes drawn from classical or medieval architecture. It is, however, festooned inside and out with extensive ornamentation derived from natural or geometrical forms. The building itself was very nearly named the Taylor Building, having been designed as a speculative investment for Buffalo businessman Haskell Taylor. Taylor, however, died unexpectedly after the blueprints had been prepared but before construction had begun. Rather than see their project disappear, the Guaranty Construction Company, the contractors who had been hired to erect the building, decided to purchase the lot and go through with construction under their own name. While not as groundbreaking as St. Paul's and the Guaranty Building, the northeast corner of Church and Pearl was once home to a third Buffalo monument, the Erie County Savings Bank, a massive Romanesque structure designed by New York architect George Post in 1893. Fit into the triangle of land once formed by Pearl, Church, and Niagara streets, the building was demolished in 1968, along with the closure of the adjacent block of Niagara Street, in order to make way for the main Place Tower. Walk a block east on Division Street to Main Street. The building filling the entire block southeast of Division and Main Streets is the Ellicott Square building, named after Joseph Ellicott, the land surveyor who had laid out Buffalo's grid in 1804. The structure was designed by the Chicago architectural firm of Banham and Root in 1895. Like Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burnham was influential among contemporary American architects, not merely as an architect, but also as a theorist. Unlike Sullivan, however, Burnham encouraged the extensive use of classical precedent, calling for broad boulevards and monumental buildings as one of the leaders of the City Beautiful movement. The Ellicott Square building encompasses Burnham's ideas in much the same way that the Guaranty building encompasses Sullivan's. The building masterfully incorporates classical ornamentation into an unmistakably urban building, one which was the largest office building in the world when it opened in 1896. Make a point of stepping into the building to visit the impressive central courtyard. From the Ellicott Square building, walk a block east on Division Street to Ellicott Street. The impressive towered building, on the southeast corner of Division and Ellicott, is the city's former post office, built between 1894 and 1901. The structure was controversial from the very beginning. At the time, most plans for large federal buildings were prepared by the government's supervising architect in order to save money. Concerns were raised, however, that the quality of federal architecture suffered as a result, and that open competitions should be held for the design of major federal buildings. In the end, the controversy, which had been simmering for several years, came to a head over the design of Buffalo's new post office. The plans had been prepared by Jeremiah O'Rourke, a government architect, but Daniel Burnham, then the president of the American Institute of Architects, felt that they were inadequate to the purpose and demanded a public competition for a new design. A lengthy and acrimonious public debate followed, and while the post office was ultimately built to O'Rourke's plans, open competitions became the norm for federal buildings thereafter. Despite Burnham's concerns, the post office as built is a monumental Gothic structure, covered with elaborate stone carving and rising to an impressive roofline. Like the Ellicott Square building, the old post office is arranged around a skylit central courtyard, which is open to the public during business hours and worth stepping into. The post office moved out of the building in 1963, and in 1981 the structure was reopened as the home of the Erie Community College. Return 2 blocks west on Division Street to Main Street, then turn right and walk north on Main Street. Along the way, notice the large office building on the east side of Main between Division and Eagle Streets. Built in 1967 as the head offices of the M&T Bank, the structure was designed by Minoru Yamasaki, a prominent modern architect best known as the architect of the ill-fated World Trade Center towers in New York. Stop in front of Lafayette Square at the intersection of Main and Court Streets. Lafayette Square was renamed in 1873 in honor of a visit to the city by the Marquis de Lafayette, a French aristocrat and hero of the American War of Independence. Over the years, the square has developed into Buffalo's commercial heart, surrounded by some of the city's most impressive hotels, banks, and office buildings. In the center of the square is the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, an impressive monument to Union soldiers who lost their lives during the American Civil War. Delayed by lengthy debates about the form such a monument should take, the column wasn't erected until 1882, designed by George Keller and Caspar Buberl. The office building on the southwest corner of Main and Court Streets is the Liberty Building, built in 1924 as the head offices of the Liberty Bank, to plans by Alfred Bossen. The bank had been founded in 1882 as the German-American Bank, but changed its name during the First World War in reaction to anti-German sentiment associated with the war. In an effort to reinforce their new image, the bank had its new head offices capped with 2 replicas of the Statue of Liberty, one facing east and the other west. A similar name change was inflicted upon the Buffalo German Insurance Company, which during the war became simply the Buffalo Insurance Company. In 1876, the company had erected one of Buffalo's largest cast-iron structures on the north side of Lafayette Square. Designed by Buffalo architect Richard Waite, the structure featured a fanciful Second Empire roofline and elaborate ornamentation, but it was unfortunately torn down in 1957 to make room for the office building currently on the site. The east side of Lafayette Square was once home to the city's courthouse, a simple, classical structure erected in 1818 to replace an earlier structure burnt down during the War of 1812. Later, the site was cleared to make way for Buffalo's first public library building, a massive Romanesque structure opened in 1886. The public competition to design the building attracted a submission from Henry Richardson, the nation's leading architect at the time, but the committee eventually settled on plans proposed by Cyril Edelitz of New York City. The structure was demolished in 1961 to make way for the present Central Library branch, arguably the city's most tragic architectural loss, made even more notable by the city's refusal to preserve the building's outstanding gargoyles. Across Clinton Street, opposite the southeast corner of Lafayette Park, is the Lafayette Hotel, built in 1904 to plans by Bethune, and Fuchs. The French-style hotel is regarded as the best work of Louise Blanchard Bethune, the first woman in the United States to be recognized as a professional architect, a status she achieved in 1881. Immediately west of the Lafayette Hotel is the Brisbane Building, on the south side of Lafayette Park, built in 1895 to plans by Buffalo architect Milton Beebe and Son, and recently restored. From Lafayette Square, continue north 2 blocks along Main Street to the intersection of Main and Huron Streets. The impressive domed building on the northeast corner of Main and Huron was built in 1901 as the Buffalo Savings Bank. Designed by the local architectural firm of Green and Wicks, the building is an imposing classical structure, rising to a gold-leaf dome. The dome, in turn, covers one of the finest banking halls on the Great Lakes. The murals in the banking hall were commissioned in 1925 and depict scenes of commerce and industry in 1920s Buffalo. The octagonal tower, visible a block further east on Huron Street, is the General Electric Building, erected in 1912 to plans by Eiswin and Johnson. Modeled in part on the Pharos Lighthouse of Alexandria, and in part on the Electric Tower at the Pan American Exhibition. The tower was intended as a celebration of the rise of the electrical industry. The Buffalo General Electric Company was established in 1892 through a merger of several earlier experiments in electrifying the city, and the company quickly began to tap the extensive hydroelectric capacities of Niagara Falls to the north of the city. When the General Electric Building was erected, the application of electricity to both personal and industrial uses was still new and exciting technology, many of Buffalo's houses having been electrified for significantly less than a decade. Continue walking north on Main Street a block and a half. You are looking for the Market Arcade at 617 Main Street. The Beaux-Arts facade of the Market Arcade conceals a crisp interior arcade, stretching through the block to Washington Street. The arcade was built in 1892 to plans by the local architectural firm of Green and Wicks. When constructed, it connected Main Street to Buffalo's Farmers Market, from which the arcade got its name. The passageway is typical of turn-of-the-century arcades, containing more than a dozen small shops inserted between the 2 blocks. Just north of the Market Arcade, at 646 Main Street, is the Shea's Buffalo, the city's last remaining movie palace. The theater was built during the heyday of early Hollywood, when movies were first becoming a widely accessible pastime, and across North America elaborate theaters were built to take advantage of the new trend. The Shea's Buffalo was built in 1926 to plans by Rapp & Rapp, a Chicago architectural firm which specialized in the design of theaters, erecting spectacular structures across the Rustbelt. The Shea's closed as a movie theater in 1974, and soon thereafter acquired a volunteer group dedicated to its restoration. The opulent and awe-inspiring 3,000-seat theater is now used for Broadway performances and other live theater productions. Walk a block and a half further north on Main Street to Edward Street. St. Louis Roman Catholic Church, on the northwest corner of Main and Edward Streets, serves to mark the boundary between downtown Buffalo and the residential neighborhoods further north. The church is the oldest Catholic parish in Buffalo, having been founded in 1829. The current church is the third on the site, replacing a brick neoclassical structure, which was destroyed in a fire in 1885. Designed by Schinkel and Dittmar, the new church is one of the city's finest Gothic structures, with an open spire rising 245 feet above the street. If the church is open, it's well worth stepping inside to view the interior. We've come to the end of our walk. From here you could return to the beginning of the walk by heading 5 blocks south on Main Street and 3 blocks west on Court Street. Alternately, you could spend the afternoon exploring the blocks of ornate Victorian houses which stretch north and west from your present location.